Hi, I'm Cassandra. Last month, I sat in our family living room watching my sister throw what she called worthless trinkets into a donation bag, while my mother nodded approvingly. They were cleaning out our late grandmother's jewelry collection, dismissing decades of carefully preserved pieces as, quote, cheap costume jewelry from thrift stores. What they didn't know was that hidden among those dismissed treasures was a diamond worth $89 million. And when the appraiser walked through our front door 3 weeks later, everything changed forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ever felt invisible in your own family? Like your voice didn't matter no matter how hard you tried to speak up? Keep watching, because what happened next left my entire family speechless and changed our lives in ways none of us could have imagined. The morning mist clung to the rolling hills of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, creating an ethereal backdrop for what would become the most significant day of my life. I pulled my faded blue Honda into the gravel driveway of my childhood home, a sprawling farmhouse that had belonged to our family for 4 generations. The white clapboard siding needed fresh paint, and the wraparound porch sagged slightly on the left side, but it remained the anchor of our family gatherings, for better or worse. At 34, I had grown accustomed to being the overlooked middle child, sandwiched between my successful older brother Marcus and my charismatic younger sister Victoria. Marcus had followed our father's footsteps into corporate law, earning partnership at a prestigious Philadelphia firm before his 40th birthday. Victoria had channeled her natural charm into a thriving real estate business, selling million-dollar properties to wealthy clients relocating from New York City. Then there was me, Cassandra, the family archivist, the keeper of memories, the one who remembered birthdays and preserved family photographs while everyone else moved forward with their important lives. I worked as a freelance genealogist and estate researcher, helping families trace their heritage and catalog inherited possessions. The work paid modestly but fulfilled something deep within me, this need to connect present moments with past stories. My family viewed my career choice with barely concealed disappointment. During holiday dinners, conversations would flow around my achievements while Marcus discussed merger negotiations, and Victoria shared stories of celebrity clients touring luxury estates. Today's gathering had been arranged to sort through Grandma Rose's belongings 3 months after her peaceful passing at 97. Rose Margaret Sullivan had been the heart of our family, a woman who emigrated from Ireland as a young bride and built a life of quiet dignity through the Great Depression and 2 world wars. Her small bedroom had remained untouched since the funeral, filled with the accumulated treasures of nearly a century of living. I pushed open the heavy oak front door, inhaling the familiar scent of lavender and old wood that defined my childhood. Voices drifted from the kitchen, where my mother Catherine was already coordinating the day's activities with military precision. At 72, she maintained the same organizational skills that had helped her manage our household while working as a high school principal for 30 years. Her gray hair was pulled back in its customary bun, and she wore one of her practical floral dresses that could transition seamlessly from housework to community meetings. "Cassandra, finally," she called as I entered the kitchen. "We've been waiting to start." Marcus drove down from Philadelphia last night, and Victoria cleared her entire afternoon for this. The subtle implication hung in the air that my time was somehow less valuable than theirs, a familiar refrain I had learned to accept rather than challenge. Marcus stood leaning against the kitchen island, scrolling through emails on his phone despite the supposed family focus of the day. At 38, he had inherited our father's tall frame and serious demeanor, though success had added a soft layer around his midsection that expensive suits couldn't quite hide. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. He glanced up briefly to acknowledge my arrival with a distracted nod before returning to his screen. Victoria burst through the back door at that moment, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the humid morning, designer jeans, and a silk blouse that probably cost more than I spent on clothing in 6 months. She carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the center of attention, a quality that had served her well in sales but sometimes made family interactions feel performative. Sorry, she announced breathlessly, though she was actually arriving exactly on time. I had to take a call from the Henderson estate. They're considering my proposal for their Hamptons property. She kissed our mother's cheek and squeezed my arm in greeting, her touch warm but brief. Our father Daniel emerged from his study, where he had been reviewing legal documents even on this family day. At 75, retirement had done little to slow his methodical approach to life. Everything required proper documentation, appropriate procedures, and careful consideration of legal implications. He had handled Grandma Rose's estate with characteristic thoroughness, ensuring all taxes were paid and assets properly distributed according to her will. Now that everyone's here, he began, consulting the notebook where he had outlined the day's objectives, we need to divide Rose's personal effects efficiently. The furniture and larger items have already been appraised and distributed according to her wishes. Today we focus on clothing, books, photographs, and what she called her quote-quote jewelry collection. The slight emphasis he placed on the last words suggested his opinion of the collection's actual value. We climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor, our footsteps creaking on wooden steps worn smooth by generations of family members. Grandma Rose's bedroom had always been my favorite room in the house, filled with natural light from east-facing windows and decorated with the quiet elegance of someone who appreciated beauty without needing to display wealth. Lace curtains framed views of the garden she had tended until her final year, and family photographs covered every available surface of her antique dresser. The closet contained decades of carefully preserved clothing, organized by season and occasion despite the limited space. Rose had been a petite woman, barely 5 feet tall, and her garments reflected both practical needs and special moments. Sunday dresses hung beside everyday house dresses, with a few formal gowns wrapped in tissue paper that spoke of younger days filled with dancing and celebration. Most of this will go to charity, Victoria announced, pulling dresses from hangers with practiced efficiency. The styles are completely outdated, and honestly, the quality isn't what you'd expect to sell in consignment shops. She held up a deep burgundy dress with intricate beadwork around the neckline, examining it with the critical eye of someone who evaluated property and possessions for a living. I reached for the dress, running my fingers over the delicate beadwork that caught the morning light. "This is beautiful, Victoria. Look at the craftsmanship. Someone spent hours creating these details by hand." She shrugged, already moving on to the next item. "Beautiful doesn't mean valuable, Cassie. We need to be practical here. Mom can't keep everything just because it has sentimental value." Marcus looked up from the financial documents he was reviewing, even during this personal task. Victoria's right. The goal is to clear the space efficiently and donate items that might benefit others. Emotional attachment isn't a practical sorting criterion. Our mother nodded approvingly at their pragmatic approach. Your grandmother was sentimental about everything. If we kept every item that held memories, this house would become a museum. We need to focus on things with actual value or utility. I continued folding the burgundy dress carefully, noting the tiny mother-of-pearl buttons and the way the fabric still held its shape after decades. But these pieces tell stories about her life. This dress might have been worn to important events, celebrations, moments that mattered to her. Stories don't pay estate taxes. Our father interjected from his position by the window, where he was making notes about items for donation receipts. We have legal obligations to settle this estate properly and clear the property for sale. The mention of selling the family home sent a familiar pang through my chest. I had volunteered multiple times to buy the house from the estate, to preserve it within the family, but my modest income couldn't support the mortgage payments that would be required. Marcus and Victoria could afford it, but had no interest in maintaining what they saw as an outdated property in a rural location that didn't fit their urban lifestyles. We worked through the morning in companionable efficiency, sorting clothing into piles for donation, preservation, and disposal. Victoria and our mother made quick decisions, their focus on clearing space and completing the task. Marcus provided occasional input when consulted, but remained primarily absorbed in his phone and laptop, treating family time as an extension of his office hours. I found myself rescuing items that the others dismissed, carefully setting aside photographs, letters, and small keepsakes that seemed too precious to donate to strangers. A wooden recipe box filled with handwritten cards in Rose's careful script. a collection of books with marginalia that revealed her thoughts and reactions to beloved stories. A small sewing kit with needles and thread that had helped her mend and create throughout her life. "Cassandra, you can't keep everything," our mother warned, noticing my growing pile of rescued items. "You don't have space in your apartment for all these things, and most of them have no practical use in modern life." "I know," I replied quietly, though I continued to examine each item before adding it to the donation pile. "I just want to make sure we're not throwing away anything important." Victoria laughed, not unkindly but with the casual dismissiveness that had characterized our interactions since childhood. "Important to whom? These are just old things, Cassie. Grandma Rose lived a simple life. She didn't own anything particularly valuable." After lunch, we turned our attention to the jewelry collection, stored in a carved wooden box that had sat on Rose's dresser for as long as I could remember. The box itself was beautiful, made of dark walnut with intricate inlay work around the edges, but like everything else belonging to our grandmother, it was dismissed as old-fashioned, rather than appreciated for its craftsmanship. Victoria opened the box with the same brisk efficiency she had applied to the clothing, revealing compartments filled with what appeared to be costume jewelry from various decades. Strings of pearls that had lost their luster, brooches with colored stones that caught the light but appeared to be glass rather than gems, rings with settings that suggested fashion rather than fine jewelry. "See?" Victoria said, holding up a chunky bracelet with large purple stones. "This is exactly what I expected. Cheap costume jewelry from department stores. The kind of things women bought to feel dressed up when they couldn't afford real gems." Our mother picked up a pair of earrings with what looked like emeralds, surrounded by small diamonds. "These might be worth something to a vintage jewelry dealer, but nothing significant. Rose always said she preferred pretty things to expensive things." Marcus barely glanced at the collection, his attention focused on calculating the time remaining before he needed to drive back to Philadelphia for evening plans. "Just donate the whole box to charity. Someone might enjoy wearing the pieces, and we can claim the donation on our taxes." I reached for a necklace that had caught my attention. A simple chain holding what appeared to be a large, clear stone in an ornate silver setting. The pendant was heavier than expected, and something about the way it caught and refracted the afternoon light streaming through the bedroom window seemed unusual for costume jewelry. "This one's interesting," I said, holding it up for the others to see. "The stone has an unusual clarity, and the setting looks like it might be platinum rather than silver." Victoria glanced over dismissively. "It's probably crystal or cubic zirconia, Cassie. Companies got very good at making fake diamonds that looked convincing. That's why costume jewelry from the 50s and 60s can fool people who don't know the difference." "But what if it's not fake?" I persisted, turning the pendant to examine it from different angles. "What if some of these pieces are actually valuable and we just don't recognize them because we're assuming they're worthless?" Our father looked up from his documentation with the patient expression he used when he thought someone was being naive. "Cassandra, your grandmother lived on a teacher's pension and Social Security. She shopped at JCPenney and bought her groceries with coupons. Where would she have gotten expensive jewelry? Maybe they were gifts," I suggested, "or inherited from her own family in Ireland, or purchased during special occasions when she was younger, before we knew her as an elderly woman on a fixed income." Marcus sighed, the sound conveying his impatience with what he clearly viewed as wishful thinking. "You're romanticizing her life, Cassie. Grandma Rose was a sweet woman who lived simply and modestly. These are pretty baubles that she enjoyed wearing, but they're not hidden treasures." Victoria had continued sorting while we talked, holding up various pieces for quick evaluation before dropping them into what she had designated as the donation pile. "Besides, if any of this stuff was valuable, don't you think she would have told us, or sold it when money was tight? She worried about paying for her medications and utility bills. She wouldn't have kept expensive jewelry in a box while struggling financially." The logic of their arguments was sound, based on practical knowledge of our grandmother's circumstances and lifestyle. Rose had indeed lived frugally, clipping coupons and shopping sales, accepting our modest financial help during her final years, when her expenses exceeded her fixed income. She had never displayed wealth or spoken of valuable possessions, preferring to focus conversations on family news and community happenings rather than material concerns. Yet something about the jewelry felt different to me, though I couldn't articulate exactly what. Perhaps it was the weight of certain pieces, or the way some of the stones seemed to have an inner fire that appeared inconsistent with costume jewelry. Or maybe it was simply my desire to believe that our grandmother's life had contained more romance and luxury than the practical surface we had always seen. "I'd like to have a few pieces appraised," I said finally, carefully selecting the pendant necklace and several other items that had caught my attention. "Just to be certain we're not missing anything important." Victoria rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "Waste your money if you want to, but don't get your hopes up. We'll all meet back here next weekend to finish cleaning out the basement and attic, and I guarantee you'll have learned that your treasures are worth exactly what they appear to be worth." Our mother nodded in agreement, though her expression held a touch of sympathy for what she clearly viewed as my sentimental attachment overriding practical judgment. "Just don't spend more on the appraisal than the jewelry could possibly be worth, dear. There are more important ways to use your money." Marcus had already returned to his phone, having lost interest in the conversation once it became clear that no significant financial decisions were required. "If you find hidden treasure in Grandma's jewelry box, I'll buy dinner for the whole family at the most expensive restaurant in Philadelphia," he said with the casual confidence of someone making a bet he was certain he would never have to honor. The rest of the afternoon passed in continued sorting and organizing, with most of Rose's personal belongings designated for donation or disposal. I managed to rescue several photo albums and the wooden recipe box, items that the others viewed as clutter, but that I saw as irreplaceable connections to family history. The jewelry box and its contents were set aside for donation, except for the few pieces I had claimed for appraisal. As evening approached and my siblings prepared to return to their respective homes and responsibilities, I lingered in Rose's bedroom, taking a final inventory of the space that would soon be empty and ready for the real estate market. The afternoon light slanted through the lace curtains, casting intricate shadows on the hardwood floor that Rose had kept polished despite her age and limited mobility. I held the pendant necklace up to the window, watching how the large stone captured and scattered the golden light in rainbow patterns across the wall. Something about the optical properties seemed remarkable for costume jewelry, but I lacked the expertise to determine whether this was significant or simply the result of high-quality crystal cutting. "Still dreaming about hidden treasure?" Victoria asked from the doorway, her tone affectionate but slightly patronizing. She had changed into casual clothes for her drive home, designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than I spent on rent each month. "Just saying goodbye," I replied, though I continued to examine the pendant. "This room holds so many memories. It feels wrong to let strangers live here, to have all her personal spaces occupied by people who never knew her." Victoria's expression softened slightly, and she entered the room to stand beside me at the window. "I know you loved her, Cassie. We all did. But keeping her things won't bring her back, and turning this house into a shrine won't preserve her memory the way you think it will." "I'm not trying to create a shrine," I said, though I wasn't entirely certain that was true. "I just think we're being too quick to dismiss everything as worthless. What if we're wrong? What if there are stories we never heard, or pieces of her life we never knew about?" "Then we'll never know," Victoria replied pragmatically. "And that's okay. People are allowed to have private lives and undisclosed experiences. But projecting mystery and hidden wealth onto costume jewelry isn't the way to honor her memory." I nodded, understanding her perspective even as I disagreed with it. Victoria lived in a world where value was measured and displayed, where expensive things looked expensive and cheap things looked cheap. Her success in real estate had trained her to assess worth quickly and accurately, to avoid the kind of sentimental attachments that could cloud professional judgment. But my work as a genealogist had taught me that families often contained surprises, that ordinary people sometimes possessed extraordinary objects for reasons that were forgotten over generations. I had helped families discover everything from Civil War artifacts to immigrant jewelry that had been dismissed as worthless costume pieces, until proper evaluation revealed their true nature. As I drove home to my small apartment in Lancaster City that evening, the selected jewelry pieces secure in a padded envelope on my passenger seat, I felt a familiar mixture of determination and uncertainty. My family's practical approach to Rose's belongings made perfect sense based on the evidence available. She had lived modestly, shopped carefully, and never displayed signs of hidden wealth. Yet something about the pendant necklace and several other pieces continued to intrigue me in ways I couldn't fully explain. The weight, the clarity, the way certain stones seemed to have an inner fire that appeared inconsistent with mass-produced costume jewelry. Perhaps it was wishful thinking, as my siblings suggested, but perhaps it was professional intuition developed through years of research and discovery. My apartment reflected both my modest budget and my passion for preserving family histories. Vintage furniture purchased at estate sales mixed with family photographs and inherited books to create a space that felt rich in stories despite its lack of expensive objects. I placed the jewelry pieces on my kitchen table under a bright lamp, examining each one with a magnifying glass I used for reading old documents and faded photographs. The pendant necklace continued to fascinate me most. The stone was remarkably clear, with no visible flaws or inclusions that I could detect. The setting appeared to be platinum rather than silver, with intricate engravings around the mount that suggested custom work rather than mass production. Most intriguingly, the stone seemed to have optical properties that dispersed light in patterns I had never seen in costume jewelry. I spent the evening researching jewelry appraisers in the area, looking for someone with credentials and experience who could provide accurate evaluation of vintage pieces. Most jewelers offered basic appraisal services, but I wanted someone with specific expertise in antique and estate jewelry who would recognize valuable pieces even when they appeared in unexpected contexts. The name Sarah Martinez appeared frequently in online recommendations, described as a certified gemologist with 30 years of experience in estate jewelry evaluation. Her credentials included training from the Gemological Institute of America and specialization in European antique pieces. Several testimonials mentioned her ability to identify valuable jewelry that had been overlooked or misattributed by other professionals. I called her office the next morning, expecting to wait weeks for an appointment, but discovered that she had a cancellation available that afternoon. Her voice on the phone was warm and professional, with the confidence of someone comfortable in her expertise without being condescending to clients who lacked technical knowledge. Her office occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian house in downtown Lancaster, accessible through a discreet entrance that suggested an established practice serving serious collectors rather than casual customers. The waiting room contained displays of antique jewelry organized by historical period, with detailed explanations of craftsmanship techniques and style evolution that I found fascinating despite my nervousness about the upcoming evaluation. Sarah Martinez proved to be a woman in her 50s with prematurely gray hair, and the kind of intense focus that comes from decades of examining minute details through magnification. She greeted me warmly and invited me into her evaluation room, which contained professional lighting systems and specialized equipment that immediately made me feel more confident about the accuracy of whatever conclusions she might reach. "What can I help you evaluate today?" she asked, settling behind a desk equipped with various magnifying devices and measurement tools. I explained the situation briefly. My grandmother's recent passing, my family's assumption that her jewelry collection contained only costume pieces, and my uncertainty about several items that seemed unusual. Sarah nodded understandingly, indicating that family members frequently brought inherited jewelry for evaluation when they suspected it might be more valuable than it appeared. "People often assume that valuable jewelry looks expensive in obvious ways," she explained as I unwrapped the pendant necklace. "But some of the most significant pieces I've evaluated have been stored in ordinary boxes and worn as everyday accessories by people who had no idea of their true worth." She took the pendant and immediately reached for a professional jeweler's loupe, examining the stone with the focused attention I had hoped to find. Her expression remained neutral and professional, but I noticed her posture shift slightly as she adjusted the lighting and switched to a more powerful magnification device. After several minutes of careful examination, she set the pendant down and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "Where did you say this came from?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled. "It belonged to my grandmother," I replied, suddenly feeling nervous about the intensity of her focus. She passed away 3 months ago. We've been sorting through her belongings, and my family assumes everything is costume jewelry from department stores. Sarah picked up the pendant again, this time using a different set of instruments to examine the setting and chain. Your grandmother never mentioned this piece specifically? Never told stories about where it came from or when she acquired it? Not that I remember, I said, though I was beginning to sense that her questions were leading somewhere significant. She wasn't someone who talked much about possessions or material things. She focused more on family and community news when we visited. I need to run some additional tests, Sarah said finally, standing to retrieve more specialized equipment from a cabinet across the room. The initial examination suggests this piece may be significantly different from what your family has assumed. My heart began racing as Sarah Martinez moved around her evaluation room, with the methodical precision of someone who had made career-changing discoveries before. She retrieved a digital scale so sensitive it could measure fractions of carats, followed by what appeared to be a spectrometer that would analyze the stone's internal structure at the molecular level. The casual atmosphere of our initial conversation had shifted into something much more serious and professional. I want you to understand, Sarah said as she calibrated her equipment, that in 30 years of evaluating estate jewelry, I've learned to temper expectations. Most pieces that families hope will be valuable turn out to be exactly what they appear to be. But occasionally, very occasionally, something crosses my desk that changes everything. She placed the pendant under a specialized microscope connected to a computer monitor, allowing me to see magnified images of the stone's internal structure. What appeared to my untrained eye as a clear, bright gem revealed itself under magnification to contain intricate patterns and crystalline formations that seemed almost architectural in their precision. The clarity is remarkable, Sarah murmured, adjusting the focus to examine different layers within the stone. I'm seeing virtually no inclusions, no color variations, no structural flaws that would indicate synthetic or simulated materials. The refractive index is consistent with natural diamond formation, and the dispersion patterns are creating that fire you see when light passes through. I leaned forward to study the monitor, watching as she rotated the stone under different lighting conditions. The internal patterns remained consistent and complex, creating a three-dimensional lattice that seemed to extend infinitely into the gem's depths. Even to my amateur understanding, the sophistication of what I was seeing seemed far beyond anything mass-produced for costume jewelry. What does that mean exactly? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect that my family's assumptions about Rose's jewelry collection might have been fundamentally wrong. Sarah continued her examination for another 20 minutes, using various instruments to test hardness, density, and optical properties. She photographed the stone from multiple angles and took precise measurements of both the gem and its setting. Her expression remained professionally neutral, but I could see excitement building in her eyes as each test confirmed whatever hypothesis she was developing. I need to be absolutely certain before I give you preliminary findings, she said finally, stepping back from the microscope. But based on the initial evaluation, this appears to be a natural diamond of exceptional quality. The stone weighs approximately 47 carats, with a clarity grade that would classify it as internally flawless under gemological standards. The words seemed to hang in the air between us while I struggled to process their implications. 47 carats, internally flawless, natural diamond. These terms carried meanings that contradicted everything my family believed about our grandmother's modest lifestyle and practical possessions. Are you saying this is real? I asked, though the question felt inadequate to capture the magnitude of what she was suggesting. I'm saying the preliminary tests indicate this is a genuine diamond of museum-quality caliber, Sarah replied carefully. The size alone makes it extraordinarily rare. Most diamonds over 20 carats are already considered exceptional. A stone of this size with this level of clarity would be virtually unprecedented in a private collection, especially one that's been worn as everyday jewelry. She picked up the pendant again, examining the platinum setting with new appreciation for its craftsmanship. The mounting is also exceptional. This isn't department store jewelry, Cassandra. The setting shows characteristics of European craftsmanship from the early 20th century, possibly Edwardian era, with detail work that would have required master-level skills to execute. I thought about Rose's stories of her youth in Ireland, the few details she had shared about her family's circumstances before her immigration to America. She had always been vague about her background, describing her parents as comfortable, without elaborating on what that meant in practical terms. We had assumed her reticence came from the immigrant experience of wanting to focus on building a new life rather than dwelling on what had been left behind. Could this have come from Ireland? I asked. From her family before she emigrated? Sarah nodded, thoughtfully. That would make sense historically. Ireland has a complex relationship with wealth and jewelry, particularly during the early 20th century, when political and economic circumstances forced many families to liquidate assets or flee with portable valuables. A piece like this could easily have been family jewelry that accompanied your grandmother to America. She returned to her computer and began searching through databases of significant gemstones, looking for any historical records that might provide context for what we were examining. Large diamonds are typically documented somewhere in gemological records, insurance files, or auction histories. If this stone has been privately held within a family for generations, it might not appear in public databases, but stones of this caliber usually leave some kind of paper trail. While Sarah continued her research, I tried to reconcile this new information with everything I thought I knew about my grandmother's life. Rose had worked as an elementary school teacher for 40 years, living in the same farmhouse, shopping carefully, saving pennies for small luxuries like her annual subscription to Better Homes and Gardens magazine. She had never traveled extensively, never displayed wealth, never mentioned valuable possessions beyond the sentimental items that filled her home. Yet the more I considered her background, the more I realized how little specific information she had actually shared about her early life. Her stories focused on experiences rather than circumstances, emotions rather than economic details. She would describe the beauty of Irish countryside, but never mention property ownership. She would talk about family celebrations, but never specify the settings or contexts that would indicate social class. "Cassandra," Sarah said suddenly, her voice carrying a new urgency that made me look up from my thoughts. "I think I found something significant." She had pulled up a digitized auction catalog from Sotheby's London, dated 1923, showing jewelry pieces being sold by various Irish families during the economic upheaval following Irish independence. One item in particular had caught her attention, a description of a 48-carat diamond pendant that had belonged to the Sullivan family of County Cork. "Sullivan was your grandmother's maiden name, wasn't it?" Sarah asked, though she could see from my expression that she had made an important connection. I nodded, suddenly feeling dizzy as pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known existed began falling into place. Rose Margaret Sullivan. She came to America in 1924, when she was 22 years old. She met my grandfather at a church social in Philadelphia and married him 6 months later. Sarah turned her computer screen so I could read the auction description more clearly. The Sullivan family had been landowners in County Cork, with holdings that included both agricultural property and what the catalog described as significant personal property, including jewelry, artwork, and furnishings accumulated over several generations. The political circumstances of the early 1920s had forced them to liquidate assets quickly, but the catalog noted that some family members had emigrated with portable valuables rather than selling everything through auction. "The timing matches perfectly," Sarah said, excitement evident in her voice despite her professional training. "Your grandmother would have left Ireland just as these auctions were taking place. If her family chose to preserve certain pieces by sending them with emigrating relatives rather than selling them publicly, it would explain how this stone remained undocumented in gemological records." She returned to examining the pendant with renewed focus, this time looking for additional evidence that might support the historical connection. The setting style is consistent with early 20th century Irish craftsmanship. The engraving patterns around the mount show Celtic influences that would be characteristic of family pieces from that region and time period. I thought about the wooden jewelry box, where this pendant had been stored for decades, mixed with, obviously, costume pieces from later periods in Rose's life. She had never highlighted this particular necklace, or suggested it was different from her other jewelry. In fact, thinking back through childhood memories, I couldn't recall ever seeing her wear it for special occasions or treat it with particular care. Why wouldn't she have told us? I asked, though I was beginning to understand that this question might not have a simple answer. If she knew this was valuable, why keep it secret? Why let us assume everything was costume jewelry? Sarah had encountered this situation before, and her expression showed understanding rather than surprise at my confusion. People hide valuable items for many reasons, especially immigrants who lived through economic uncertainty. Your grandmother's generation often believed that displaying wealth could attract unwanted attention or government scrutiny. They learned to blend in, to appear modest, to avoid standing out in ways that might threaten their security. She gestured toward the pendant, which looked deceptively simple despite its extraordinary nature. This piece could be worn as everyday jewelry without attracting notice. Unless someone knew exactly what to look for, it would appear to be an attractive but unremarkable necklace. Your grandmother might have felt safer wearing it openly rather than hiding it away where its absence might be noticed. The psychological complexity of what Sarah was describing resonated with stories I had heard about immigrant experiences during Rose's generation. The need to assimilate, to avoid appearing too prosperous or foreign, to maintain security through anonymity rather than display. Rose had never talked directly about these concerns, but I remembered her frugal habits, her discomfort with attention, her preference for blending into community activities rather than standing out. I need to conduct a few more specialized tests, Sarah said, carefully placing the pendant in a secured examination tray. I want to verify the stone's origin using spectroscopic analysis, and I need to examine the other pieces you brought to determine if there might be additional surprises in your grandmother's collection. She picked up the earrings I had selected, holding them under the professional lighting with the same careful attention she had given the pendant. The stones appeared to be emeralds surrounded by smaller diamonds, set in what looked like white gold or platinum. Under magnification, the emeralds showed the characteristic inclusions and color variations of natural stones, while the surrounding diamonds displayed the same exceptional clarity I had observed in the pendant. These are also genuine, Sarah said after several minutes of examination. Colombian emeralds, based on the inclusion patterns, probably dating from the same period as the pendant. The craftsmanship is consistent with the same jewelry house or family collection. She moved on to examine a brooch I had selected, an intricate design featuring what appeared to be sapphires and diamonds in a floral pattern. Again, her professional evaluation revealed genuine stones of remarkable quality, set with the kind of attention to detail that indicated custom work rather than mass production. Cassandra, Sarah said finally, looking up from her examination with an expression that mixed professional excitement with personal concern. You need to understand what we're looking at here. This isn't just one valuable piece mixed in with costume jewelry. This appears to be a collection of museum-quality gems that have been stored and worn as everyday accessories for decades. She began calculating estimated values based on current market prices for stones of comparable size and quality. The numbers she mentioned seemed abstract and impossible. Figures that belonged in newspaper articles about auction houses and celebrity estates, rather than conversations about my grandmother's modest jewelry box. The pendant alone, based on size, clarity, and historical provenance, could be valued between $60 and $90 million, she said carefully. The emerald earrings might reach 15 to 20 million. The sapphire brooch could be worth another 8 to 10 million. And I haven't even examined all the pieces you brought. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process numbers that seemed disconnected from any reality I understood. $90 million. This amount exceeded the GDP of small countries, the net worth of major corporations, the total value of everything my family had ever owned, combined across multiple generations. That's impossible, I said finally, though I could see from Sarah's expression that she was entirely serious about her preliminary estimates. People don't accidentally inherit $90 million in jewelry. That doesn't happen to families like mine. It's extremely rare, Sarah agreed, but not impossible. Especially when you consider the historical circumstances. Irish families with significant wealth often chose to preserve assets through emigration rather than liquidation during the political upheaval of the 1920s. Your grandmother's family may have given her these pieces specifically because they recognized that staying in Ireland might mean losing everything. She pulled up additional historical documentation showing the extensive property holdings and business interests that the Sullivan family had maintained in County Cork before Irish independence. They weren't just comfortable, Cassandra, they were among the wealthiest families in their region, with mining interests, shipping investments, and agricultural holdings that spanned several counties. The information was overwhelming, requiring me to completely reconstruct my understanding of Rose's background and circumstances. She hadn't been a modest schoolteacher who happened to own some pretty jewelry. She had been the heir to significant family wealth, who had chosen to live quietly in America while preserving extraordinary assets for future generations. I need to call my family, I said, though I wasn't sure how to begin explaining what Sarah had discovered. They're planning to donate all of her jewelry to charity. They have no idea what we're dealing with. Sarah nodded understandingly, but her expression carried a note of caution that made me pause. Before you contact them, you should consider the implications of what we've discovered. This level of wealth will change family dynamics in ways you might not anticipate. People react differently to unexpected financial windfalls, especially when the amounts involved are this significant. She was right, of course. Marcus and Victoria had built their identities around their professional success and financial achievements. Learning that our overlooked grandmother had been sitting on assets worth more than their combined lifetime earnings would challenge fundamental assumptions about worth, success, and family hierarchy. There are also practical considerations, Sarah continued. Insurance, security, legal documentation, tax implications. These pieces will need professional preservation and storage while you determine how to proceed. They can't just go back into a wooden box in an empty farmhouse. The complexity of what lay ahead began to dawn on me as I realized that discovering the jewelry's value was actually the simple part. Managing the implications, protecting the assets, and navigating family relationships around this unexpected inheritance would require expertise and planning far beyond anything I had ever dealt with. I want to complete my full evaluation before you make any family announcements, Sarah said. Let me document everything properly, provide certified appraisals, and help you understand all the options for preservation and insurance. This discovery is going to change your life, Cassandra, but you need to be prepared for everything that comes with that change. As I drove home that afternoon, my mind reeled with the implications of what I had learned. The pendant, carefully secured in a specialized jewelry case that Sarah had provided, seemed to weigh more than just its physical mass. It carried the weight of family history I had never known, financial responsibility I had never imagined, and social dynamics I wasn't prepared to navigate. I thought about Victoria's dismissive comments about cheap costume jewelry from thrift stores, and Marcus's confident bet about buying dinner if I found hidden treasure. Their assumptions had seemed so reasonable based on everything we thought we knew about Rose's circumstances. Even I had been hoping for modest vindication, perhaps discovering that a few pieces might be worth enough to fund preservation of family photographs or historical research. Instead, I was facing the reality that our grandmother had been one of the wealthiest women in Pennsylvania, quietly living on a teacher's pension, while possessing assets that could have purchased entire city blocks. The disconnect between her lifestyle and her hidden wealth spoke to a level of personal discipline and security consciousness that I was only beginning to appreciate. My small apartment felt even more cramped when I returned, the modest furnishings and careful budget that defined my daily life suddenly seeming insignificant in the context of what I had discovered. Yet the jewelry pieces, now secured in Sarah's professional case, looked no different than they had when I first noticed them in Rose's wooden box. Their value lay hidden beneath appearances that had successfully deceived my entire family for decades. I spent the evening researching the Sullivan family's history in County Cork, using genealogical databases and historical records to piece together the background that Rose had never shared with us. The picture that emerged was of a family with substantial holdings in mining, shipping, and agriculture, with connections to other prominent Irish families and business interests that extended beyond Ireland into England and continental Europe. The political upheaval following Irish independence had indeed forced many wealthy families to make difficult choices about preserving assets versus maintaining residence. The Sullivan family appeared to have chosen a strategy of diversification, with some members emigrating with portable wealth, while others attempted to maintain Irish properties under the new political system. Rose's immigration to America in 1924 aligned perfectly with this historical timeline, and the jewelry she had carried with her represented a portable fortune that could have funded comfortable living indefinitely if she had chosen to convert it to cash. Instead, she had worked as a teacher, lived modestly, and preserved the family wealth for future generations who had no idea of their inheritance. The more I learned about the historical context, the more I appreciated the complexity of the choices Rose had made throughout her life. She had successfully assimilated into American society while maintaining connection to her Irish heritage. She had provided for her immediate needs through honest work, while preserving family assets for descendants she might never live to see reach financial maturity. Most remarkably, she had managed to keep this secret for over 70 years, wearing multi-million-dollar jewelry as everyday accessories, while never allowing the knowledge of her wealth to alter her relationships or lifestyle. The discipline and security consciousness required for this level of discretion spoke to personal strength that I was only beginning to understand. As I prepared for bed that night, I realized that tomorrow would bring conversations with my family that would fundamentally alter our relationships and dynamics. Marcus and Victoria would need to recalibrate their understanding of success, wealth, and family hierarchy. Our parents would need to reconcile their memories of Rose with this new information about her background and circumstances. Most challenging of all, I would need to navigate the complex territory of being the family member who had discovered and preserved what everyone else had been ready to donate to charity. The vindication I had hoped for was about to arrive in ways I had never imagined, carrying responsibilities and consequences that extended far beyond simple family dynamics. The pendant lay secure in its protective case, catching and refracting the streetlight that filtered through my bedroom window. Even in the dim lighting, the stone's exceptional clarity created subtle patterns of light that seemed almost alive. Tomorrow, Sarah would complete her comprehensive evaluation and provide certified documentation of what I had inherited. But tonight I sat with the knowledge that my overlooked position in the family hierarchy was about to be permanently altered, and that Rose's final gift to us was not just extraordinary wealth, but the opportunity to honor her memory by managing that wealth with the same wisdom and discretion she had shown throughout her remarkable life. 3 days later, Sarah Martinez called with news that made my hands tremble as I answered the phone. Her voice carried an excitement that she was struggling to contain within professional boundaries, and I knew before she spoke that the final evaluations had confirmed her initial assessment. "Cassandra, I need you to come in immediately," she said without preamble. "I've completed the comprehensive analysis, and we need to discuss security arrangements before word of this discovery spreads beyond my office." I drove to her office through morning traffic that seemed surreal given the magnitude of what I was about to learn. Lancaster County moved at its usual unhurried pace, farm trucks sharing roads with commuter traffic, the rhythm of ordinary life continuing, while my world prepared to shift on its axis. The jewelry pieces had spent the night in Sarah's professional vault, and I realized that they might never return to the simple wooden box where they had rested for decades. Sarah's receptionist directed me immediately to her private office, where she had prepared a formal presentation complete with certified documentation, professional photographs, and detailed analysis reports. The jewelry pieces lay arranged on black velvet under specialized lighting that revealed their true brilliance in ways that my grandmother's bedroom window never could have achieved. "The final results exceed even my preliminary estimates," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the extraordinary nature of what she was about to reveal. "The pendant stone is a 47.3-carat diamond, with a clarity rating of IF, internally flawless, with a color grade of D, completely colorless. Using current market comparisons for stones of similar quality, I'm estimating its value at $89 million. The number hit me like a physical blow, even though I thought I had prepared myself for confirmation of her earlier estimates. $89 million. The figure seemed to belong to a different universe than the one where I worried about monthly rent payments and whether I could afford to replace my aging Honda. The emerald earrings are Colombian stones of exceptional quality, approximately 12 carats each, with minimal inclusions and perfect color saturation," she continued, consulting her detailed notes. Current market value would be approximately $22 million for the pair. She moved systematically through each piece I had brought for evaluation, revealing a collection that defied comprehension. The sapphire brooch contained cashmere sapphires surrounded by diamonds, worth an estimated $15 million. A ruby ring featured a Burmese stone of such exceptional quality that Sarah had consulted with international experts to confirm her assessment of its $12 million value. In total, she said finally, setting down her documentation and looking at me directly, the pieces you selected for evaluation are worth approximately $138 million. And these represent only a fraction of the jewelry collection stored in your grandmother's wooden box. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process numbers that seemed disconnected from any reality I could comprehend. $138 million. This amount exceeded the operating budgets of major universities, the market capitalization of significant corporations, the combined wealth of entire communities in Lancaster County. There's more, Sarah said gently, recognizing that I was struggling to absorb what she had already revealed. I've been in contact with colleagues who specialize in historical jewelry, and they believe your grandmother's collection may include pieces that belong to other prominent Irish families who chose to consolidate assets before emigration. If that's accurate, the total value could be significantly higher than what we've calculated so far. She retrieved a leather portfolio from her desk and opened it to reveal additional documentation that had arrived overnight from experts in Dublin and London. The Sullivan family wasn't just wealthy, Cassandra. They were among the key figures in facilitating emigration for other prominent families during the political upheaval of the 1920s. Your grandmother may have been entrusted with jewelry collections from multiple families, making her the custodian of Irish heritage as well as Irish wealth. The historical implications of what Sarah was describing began to dawn on me as I realized that Rose's quiet life in Pennsylvania had concealed not just personal wealth, but cultural responsibility. She hadn't simply been preserving family assets. She had been maintaining connections to an entire social system that had been disrupted by political change. I need to examine the complete collection, Sarah said firmly. Every piece in that wooden box needs professional evaluation before your family makes any decisions about donation or disposal. Based on what we've discovered so far, you may be looking at the most significant private jewelry collection in American hands. The weight of responsibility settled over me like a physical burden as I contemplated the practical implications of Sarah's discoveries. These weren't just valuable objects. They were historical artifacts that required specialized care, insurance, security, and ultimately decisions about preservation and stewardship that would affect future generations. My family is planning to meet this weekend to finish clearing out the house, I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. They're expecting to donate everything to charity and put the property on the market immediately. Sarah's expression grew serious as she considered the timing and logistics of what needed to happen next. That cannot proceed as planned. These pieces need immediate professional security and insurance coverage. More importantly, your family needs to understand the legal and financial implications of what you've inherited before they make any irreversible decisions. She began outlining the complex processes that would be required to properly manage the collection. Professional appraisals for insurance purposes would take weeks to complete. Security arrangements would need to be established immediately to protect assets worth more than most people earned in multiple lifetimes. Legal documentation would be required to establish ownership and inheritance rights that could withstand scrutiny from multiple jurisdictions. There's something else you need to consider, Sarah said, her tone shifting to address the personal dimensions of what I was facing. News of a discovery this significant will inevitably become public. Major auction houses, insurance companies, and financial institutions maintain networks that share information about extraordinary finds. Your privacy and security may be compromised once word spreads. The implications of public attention had not occurred to me, but Sarah's warning made me realize that my quiet life as a freelance genealogist was about to become impossible to maintain. People worth hundreds of millions of dollars could not simply return to their previous routines and relationships without fundamental changes in how they moved through the world. I need to tell my family before anyone else learns about this, I said. though I was beginning to understand that even family conversations would be complicated by the extraordinary nature of what I had discovered. They have a right to know before this becomes public knowledge. Sarah nodded understandingly, but her expression carried notes of caution that made me pause. Family dynamics around sudden wealth can be complex and unpredictable. People you've known your entire life may react in ways that surprise you when amounts this significant are involved. She was referring, I realized, to the psychological impact of discovering that family hierarchy and assumptions about success were about to be permanently altered. Marcus and Victoria had built their identities around professional achievement and financial accomplishment. Learning that their overlooked sister had inherited wealth beyond their combined lifetime earnings would challenge fundamental beliefs about merit, worth, and family standing. "I want to arrange the family meeting here, in my office," I said suddenly, recognizing that neutral professional space might provide better context for revelations of this magnitude. "Would you be willing to present your findings directly to them? They need to hear this from someone with credentials and expertise, rather than from me." Sarah agreed immediately, understanding that professional presentation would lend credibility to discoveries that might otherwise seem impossible to believe. We scheduled the meeting for Saturday afternoon, giving me time to contact my family members and arrange for them to attend what I described only as important news about Grandma Rose's estate. The phone calls were more difficult than I had anticipated, primarily because I struggled to find language that would convey urgency without revealing specifics that belonged in face-to-face conversation. Marcus was annoyed at having his weekend disrupted for what he assumed would be minor estate details. Victoria was skeptical about anything related to Rose's belongings requiring professional consultation. Our parents were confused about why estate matters hadn't been resolved months earlier. "Is this about that jewelry you wanted appraised?" Victoria asked with barely concealed impatience. "Cassie, if you've spent money getting costume jewelry evaluated, you need to accept the results and move on." "Just please come," I said, avoiding details that would trigger premature conclusions. "Sarah Martinez needs to discuss her findings with the entire family. It's important." I spent the next 3 days in a state of nervous anticipation, carrying knowledge that felt too large and consequential for one person to manage alone. The certified appraisal documents remained locked in my apartment safe, but their contents had altered my perception of everything around me. My modest furniture and careful budgeting seemed absurd in the context of wealth that could purchase entire neighborhoods. Yet the external world remained unchanged, continuing its familiar rhythms while I struggled to process the implications of what I had inherited. The most surreal aspect of those 3 days was the ordinariness of continued life. I completed genealogical research projects for clients, grocery shopped with coupons, and worried about my car's strange engine noise exactly as if I hadn't discovered assets worth more than some countries' annual budgets. The disconnect between internal knowledge and external circumstances felt increasingly difficult to maintain. Friday evening, I drove to the farmhouse one final time before the family meeting, wanting to see Rose's jewelry box in its original context before everything changed forever. The empty house felt different now, charged with historical significance that had been invisible during our sorting and packing sessions. Every room seemed to contain secrets that we had overlooked, stories that we had been too practical to investigate. Rose's bedroom looked exactly as we had left it, cleared of personal belongings except for basic furniture that would remain for potential buyers. The jewelry box sat on the dresser where it had always been, its carved walnut surface worn smooth by decades of daily use. I opened it carefully, examining the remaining pieces with new understanding of what I was looking at. Even the obviously costume jewelry took on different significance when I considered it in context of the extraordinary pieces hidden among them. Rose had been strategic about camouflaging wealth, mixing museum-quality gems with inexpensive accessories in ways that made the valuable pieces appear to be part of a typical collection accumulated over a long lifetime. I selected several additional pieces that had previously seemed unremarkable, recognizing now that my initial choices had been guided by intuition rather than comprehensive evaluation. A simple gold bracelet that felt heavier than expected. A pair of pearl earrings with luster that seemed inconsistent with cultured varieties. A small ring with what appeared to be a clear stone that might be another diamond of significant size. The additional pieces filled a small, padded case that I locked in my car, understanding that their security had become a serious responsibility. Tomorrow's family meeting would determine not just how we processed Rose's secret, but how we managed assets that would fundamentally alter our family's relationship with wealth, responsibility, and each other. That night, I lay awake, contemplating the conversations that would unfold in Sarah's office, trying to imagine how Marcus and Victoria would react to discoveries that challenged everything they thought they knew about success and family dynamics. Their confident dismissal of Rose's belongings would be revealed as one of the most expensive mistakes in family history, though I took no satisfaction in that irony. More complex was the realization that my position as the overlooked family member had been permanently altered. For 34 years, I had been the sister who chose passion over profit, sentiment over practicality, preservation over progress. Tomorrow, I would become the family member whose judgment had preserved assets worth more than Marcus and Victoria's combined lifetime earnings. The responsibility felt overwhelming, not because of the wealth itself, but because of the stewardship it represented. Rose had trusted future generations to maintain what she had preserved, to honor the historical and cultural significance of what she had protected. The decisions we made in the coming weeks and months would determine whether her 70-year commitment to discretion and preservation would be honored or squandered. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzling, typical October weather for Lancaster County that matched my apprehensive mood. I dressed carefully in my best professional outfit, a navy suit that had served me well for important client meetings, but now seemed inadequate for conversations about $100 million inheritances. Sarah's office had been prepared for formal presentation, with additional seating arranged around her evaluation table and documentation organized for systematic review. She had coordinated with her security company to ensure that the jewelry pieces would be safely displayed while maintaining appropriate protection for assets of their extraordinary value. "Are you ready for this?" Sarah asked as I arrived early to review her presentation materials and prepare for family reactions that neither of us could fully predict. "I don't think anyone could be ready for this," I replied honestly, though I appreciated her professional support in navigating territory that extended far beyond typical family estate matters. Marcus arrived precisely on time, followed closely by Victoria and our parents. They entered Sarah's office with expressions that ranged from curious to skeptical, clearly expecting to spend a brief time reviewing minor estate details before returning to their weekend plans. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah began, her voice carrying the formal tone she used for significant presentations. "I need to discuss discoveries that will require careful consideration and planning from your entire family." Victoria settled into her chair with the impatient efficiency that characterized her approach to meetings, checking her phone for messages while Sarah organized her materials. Marcus reviewed documents from his briefcase, multitasking even during family gatherings in ways that had become habitual throughout his career. Our parents sat more attentively, though their expressions suggested they expected routine information about Rose's estate rather than anything requiring concentrated focus. The comfortable assumptions that had guided our family's approach to inheritance and wealth were about to be permanently shattered. "Last week, Cassandra brought several pieces of jewelry for professional evaluation," Sarah continued, gesturing toward the display case where Rose's treasures lay arranged under professional lighting. "The results of that evaluation require immediate family discussion and planning." She moved to the jewelry display, her movements deliberate and formal as she prepared to reveal discoveries that would alter our family's understanding of wealth, inheritance, and Rose's hidden life. The pendant necklace caught the office lighting in ways that revealed its exceptional brilliance, while the emerald earrings seemed to glow with inner fire that spoke of their extraordinary quality. "These pieces," Sarah said finally, "represent one of the most significant private jewelry collections I have encountered in 30 years of professional practice." The silence that followed her statement was complete, filled with the weight of revelations that were about to transform everything my family thought they knew about Rose's legacy and our own futures. The air in Sarah's office seemed to crystallize as she reached for the pendant necklace, lifting it with the reverence reserved for objects of extraordinary significance. The stone caught the professional lighting and transformed it into cascades of rainbow fire that danced across the walls, creating an almost hypnotic display that immediately commanded everyone's attention. "This pendant," Sarah began, her voice carrying the weight of professional authority, "contains a 47.3-carat diamond of museum-quality caliber. The stone has been certified as internally flawless with a color grade of D, representing the absolute pinnacle of diamond quality." Victoria's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the conference table as she stared at the necklace with an expression of complete disbelief. Marcus had gone completely still, his usual multitasking behavior abandoned as he focused entirely on Sarah's words. Our parents sat frozen, their faces reflecting confusion and dawning comprehension that something unprecedented was unfolding. "The current market value of this single piece," Sarah continued, allowing the pendant to rotate slowly under the lights, "is $89 million. The silence that followed was absolute and profound, broken only by the distant sound of traffic from the street below. $89 million. The number seemed to hang in the air like a physical presence, too large and impossible to be absorbed immediately by minds that had never contemplated wealth of such magnitude. Marcus was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Did you say $89 million? Sarah nodded solemnly, setting the pendant back in its secure display case before retrieving the emerald earrings. These earrings contain Colombian emeralds of exceptional quality, each approximately 12 carats, with clarity and color saturation that places them among the finest examples known to exist. Their estimated value is $22 million. Victoria made a sound that might have been a gasp or a sob, her hand pressed against her chest as if she were having difficulty breathing. The woman who had confidently dismissed Rose's cheap costume jewelry now stared at pieces worth more than the combined value of every property she had ever sold in her successful real estate career. "This is impossible," our mother said finally, her voice shaking with emotion. "Rose lived on a teacher's pension. She shopped with coupons. She worried about paying her utility bills. Where would she have gotten jewelry worth millions of dollars?" Sarah had anticipated this question and retrieved the historical documentation she had compiled about the Sullivan family's background in Ireland. "Your mother-in-law wasn't just the daughter of comfortable Irish farmers, as you've always understood. The Sullivan family of County Cork were among the wealthiest landowners in Ireland, with holdings that included mining operations, shipping interests, and agricultural properties spanning several counties." She spread photographs and documents across the table, revealing a family history that none of us had ever heard. Images of grand estates, shipping manifests listing Sullivan family cargo vessels, mining claims that extended throughout Ireland and into Wales. The documentation painted a picture of wealth and influence that contradicted everything we thought we knew about Rose's modest background. The political upheaval following Irish independence forced many prominent families to make difficult choices about preserving their wealth, Sarah explained, her voice taking on the tone of a history professor addressing students who were struggling to comprehend complex events. The Sullivan family chose a strategy of diversification, sending family members to America with portable assets, while others attempted to maintain Irish properties under the new political system. Our father, trained by decades of legal practice to focus on practical details even during emotional revelations, leaned forward to examine the documentation more closely. "Are you saying that Rose inherited this jewelry from her family in Ireland?" "I'm saying that Rose Margaret Sullivan was entrusted with preserving not just her own family's wealth, but jewelry collections from multiple prominent Irish families who chose to consolidate their portable assets with trusted emigrants, rather than risk everything in political uncertainty," Sarah replied. "She wasn't just an immigrant seeking better opportunities. She was a custodian of Irish cultural heritage and family wealth, spanning generations." The implications of what Sarah was describing began to settle over the room like a heavy blanket. Rose hadn't simply been our beloved grandmother, who lived modestly and worked as a schoolteacher. She had been a secret keeper, a guardian of treasures that represented the disrupted lives and lost worlds of entire families, forced to flee their homeland. Victoria found her voice again, though it sounded strained and unfamiliar. "You're telling us that for 70 years, Grandma Rose was sitting on a fortune worth hundreds of millions of dollars while she lived like she had no money? Your grandmother understood something that many wealthy people never learn, Sarah said gently. True security comes not from displaying wealth, but from preserving it wisely. She maintained a modest lifestyle while ensuring that extraordinary assets would be available for future generations who might need them. Marcus had begun calculating implications with the systematic approach that characterized his legal training, though his usual confidence had been replaced by visible shock. The tax implications alone would be staggering. If the IRS discovers that we've inherited assets of this magnitude without proper documentation, all of these pieces were legally imported and have remained within your family for 70 years, Sarah assured him. I've been coordinating with specialists in estate law and international asset management to ensure that everything is properly documented and legally protected. She moved systematically through the remaining pieces, each revelation more extraordinary than the last. The sapphire brooch contained cashmere sapphires of a quality that made them virtually priceless in contemporary markets. The ruby ring featured a Burmese stone so exceptional that Sarah had consulted with experts in 3 countries to confirm her valuation. Even pieces that appeared to be simple gold jewelry proved to contain rare metals and craftsmanship that elevated their worth far beyond their apparent simplicity. The total value of the pieces Cassandra selected for evaluation, Sarah announced finally, exceeds $138 million. And these represent only a small fraction of the complete collection stored in your grandmother's jewelry box. The number landed like a physical blow, leaving everyone stunned into silence once again. $138 million. Even Marcus, accustomed to dealing with significant financial transactions through his legal practice, seemed unable to process the magnitude of what Sarah was describing. Our mother began to cry, tears streaming down her face as she contemplated the implications of what we had learned. She never said anything, never gave us any indication. We thought she was struggling financially. We helped her pay for medications and home repairs because we believed she couldn't afford them. She could have afforded to buy this entire town, Victoria said, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and something that might have been anger. She could have lived in luxury, traveled the world, done anything she wanted. Instead, she wore old clothes and worried about grocery prices while sitting on a fortune that could have supported her for 10 lifetimes. Sarah's expression showed understanding for the complex emotions that families experienced when discovering hidden wealth. Your grandmother made choices that prioritized security and preservation over comfort and display. She lived through the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and economic uncertainty that shaped her understanding of what constituted real safety. She gestured toward the jewelry display, where millions of dollars in gems caught the office lighting and created patterns of reflected brilliance that seemed almost alive. These pieces represent more than monetary value. They're tangible connections to family history, cultural heritage, and the sacrifices made by previous generations to ensure that future families would have resources when they were needed most. The weight of responsibility that accompanied such extraordinary inheritance was beginning to dawn on all of us. This wasn't simply unexpected wealth that could be divided and spent according to individual preferences. These were historical artifacts that carried obligations to honor the intentions of the people who had preserved them through decades of careful stewardship. Marcus was the first to begin processing practical implications, his legal training helping him focus on concrete details, while the emotional impact continued to reverberate. What kind of security arrangements are required for assets of this value? Obviously, they can't remain in a wooden box in an empty farmhouse. Sarah had prepared comprehensive recommendations for immediate steps that would be required to protect the collection: professional vault storage, specialized insurance coverage, security systems that could protect against threats that extended far beyond ordinary theft concerns. The logistics of managing such wealth required expertise and resources that none of us had ever needed to consider. There's another consideration that you need to understand, Sarah said, her tone becoming more serious as she addressed the broader implications of their discovery. News of a find this significant will inevitably become public knowledge. Insurance companies, auction houses, and financial institutions, Maintain networks that share information about extraordinary discoveries. Your family's privacy and security may be permanently altered once word spreads. The prospect of public attention added another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming situation. Victoria's real estate business relied on her reputation within Pennsylvania's luxury property market. Marcus's legal practice served high-net-worth clients who valued discretion and stability. Our parents had lived quiet lives within their Lancaster County community for decades, maintaining friendships and social connections based on shared middle-class experiences and values. How long do we have before this becomes public? Our father asked, his practical nature asserting itself as he began to consider the timeline for decisions that would need to be made quickly. I've maintained strict confidentiality throughout my evaluation process, Sarah replied. But comprehensive insurance and security arrangements will require coordination with multiple companies and specialists. Complete discretion becomes increasingly difficult as more professionals become involved in managing assets of this magnitude. I realized that the burden of discovery was about to be shared by the entire family, though my role as the person who had recognized and preserved the jewelry would remain significant. The vindication I had hoped for was unfolding in ways far beyond anything I could have imagined, though it brought responsibilities and consequences that extended far beyond simple family recognition. Victoria turned toward me with an expression that mixed gratitude with something that might have been resentment. If you hadn't insisted on having them appraised, we would have donated hundreds of millions of dollars to charity without ever knowing what we were giving away. The statement hung in the air as everyone contemplated how close we had come to making what would have been one of the most expensive mistakes in family history. My decision to rescue a few pieces from the donation pile had preserved assets worth more than most people encountered in their entire lives. Cassandra saved our family from financial catastrophe, our mother said quietly, though her voice carried undertones of shock that hadn't yet resolved into clear emotional processing. She was the only one who questioned our assumptions about Rose's belongings. Marcus nodded slowly, his usual confidence replaced by visible humility, as he processed the implications of his dismissive attitude toward my judgment. I owe you an apology, Cassie. Actually, I owe you much more than an apology. I owe you recognition that your instincts and expertise were right, when the rest of us were completely wrong. The acknowledgement felt surreal after years of having my interests and insights dismissed as impractical sentiment that interfered with efficient decision-making. Yet the satisfaction of vindication was complicated by the overwhelming nature of what vindication had revealed. Sarah began outlining the immediate steps that would be required to properly manage our inheritance. Professional appraisals of the complete collection would take several weeks to complete and would require coordination with international experts who specialized in historical jewelry of museum quality. Security arrangements needed to be established immediately to protect assets that were too valuable to remain in conventional storage. Legal documentation would be required to establish clear ownership and inheritance rights that could withstand scrutiny from tax authorities, insurance companies, and potentially international organizations that tracked cultural artifacts. Financial planning would need to address tax implications that could reach into tens of millions of dollars depending on how the inheritance was structured and managed. Most importantly, Sarah emphasized, you need to decide as a family how you want to approach the stewardship of these assets. Rose preserved them for 70 years, while maintaining complete discretion. The decisions you make in the coming weeks will determine whether her commitment to preservation and security will be honored or fundamentally altered. The complexity of choices facing us was beginning to dawn on everyone as we realized that discovering the jewelry's value was actually the simplest part of what lay ahead. Managing extraordinary wealth required expertise, planning, and coordination that none of us had ever needed to develop. Our parents sat holding hands, their faces reflecting the emotional turbulence of learning that their understanding of Rose's life and circumstances had been fundamentally incomplete. The woman they had known as a frugal retiree who worried about utility bills had actually been one of the wealthiest individuals in Pennsylvania, quietly managing assets that exceeded the net worth of major corporations. Victoria was scrolling through her phone, apparently researching information about jewelry collections and estate management, her real estate expertise providing some framework for understanding asset valuation, even when the amounts involved exceeded anything in her professional experience. Marcus had retrieved his laptop and was making notes about legal and financial considerations that would need immediate attention. His systematic approach to complex problems helping him process practical implications, while the emotional impact continued to reverberate. "We need time to absorb this information and discuss our options as a family," our father said finally, his voice carrying the measured tone he used when making important legal decisions. "But we also need to move quickly to protect assets that are too valuable to remain inadequately secured." Sarah nodded understandingly, recognizing that families required time to process discoveries of this magnitude, while practical necessities demanded immediate action. "I've prepared recommendations for emergency security measures that can be implemented immediately, while you consider longer-term options for management and preservation." As the meeting concluded and we prepared to leave Sarah's office, I found myself looking back at the jewelry display, where millions of dollars in gems continued to catch and refract the professional lighting. These pieces had rested in Rose's wooden box for decades, masquerading as costume jewelry while representing wealth that could have funded universities, hospitals, or entire communities. Tomorrow, everything would change. Our family's relationship with wealth, success, and each other had been permanently altered by discoveries that challenged every assumption we had maintained about inheritance, value, and Rose's hidden life. The quiet vindication I had hoped for had arrived in the form of revelations that would reshape our futures in ways none of us could fully comprehend. But tonight, as we drove home through the familiar streets of Lancaster County, I carried the knowledge that my overlooked position in the family hierarchy had been forever transformed, and that Rose's final gift to us was not just extraordinary wealth, but the opportunity to honor her memory by managing that wealth with the same wisdom and discretion she had demonstrated throughout her remarkable life. 6 months later, I stood in the climate-controlled vault of Pemberton & Associates Private Wealth Management, watching as the final pieces of Rose's collection were cataloged and secured in individual compartments designed specifically for museum-quality artifacts. The complete evaluation had revealed treasures worth over $400 million, making it one of the most significant private collections discovered in American history. The transformation in our family dynamics had been as dramatic as the financial windfall itself. Marcus had taken a leave of absence from his law firm to coordinate the complex legal and tax implications of our inheritance, working with specialists in international estate law who had never encountered a case quite like ours. His earlier dismissiveness had been replaced by genuine respect for my judgment, and he frequently consulted me on decisions about preservation and historical documentation. Victoria had leveraged her real estate expertise to help us acquire a secure compound in Chester County, where we established a private foundation dedicated to preserving Irish cultural heritage. Her natural charm and business acumen proved invaluable in navigating relationships with museum curators, historians, and cultural organizations who were fascinated by the collection's provenance and significance. Our parents had struggled most with the psychological adjustment to extraordinary wealth. After decades of careful budgeting and modest living, they found it difficult to accept that money was no longer a constraint on any decision they might want to make. We had hired financial advisors, security specialists, and personal assistants to help them navigate their new circumstances, but the emotional impact of learning that Rose had possessed such wealth while accepting their modest financial assistance continued to affect them deeply. The most profound change had been in my own life and sense of purpose. The vindication I had experienced when Sarah first revealed the jewelry's value had evolved into something more complex and meaningful. I had established myself as the family's primary liaison with historians, genealogists, and cultural institutions who were helping us understand the full significance of what Rose had preserved. My work now involved coordinating with experts from Trinity College Dublin, the National Museum of Ireland, and the Irish Cultural Centre of Philadelphia to document the stories behind each piece in the collection. We had discovered that Rose's jewelry represented not just her own family's wealth, but treasures from at least 12 prominent Irish families who had entrusted the Sullivan family with preserving their heritage during the political upheaval of the 1920s. Each piece carried stories that we were slowly uncovering through historical research and genealogical investigation. The emerald earrings had belonged to the O'Brien family, whose castle in County Clare had been seized during the Civil War. The sapphire brooch had been passed down through 7 generations of the McCarthy clan before being entrusted to Rose's grandmother for safekeeping. Even smaller pieces revealed connections to Irish literary figures, political leaders, and cultural movements that had shaped the country's history. The responsibility of stewardship had become my life's work, though it was work that fulfilled me in ways I had never experienced before. Instead of helping individual families trace their heritage, I was now preserving cultural history that belonged to entire communities and nations. The skills I had developed as a genealogist proved perfectly suited to managing a collection that required both historical expertise and careful documentation. Our family had established the Sullivan Heritage Foundation, with me serving as executive director and primary curator. The foundation's mission involved not just preserving the jewelry collection, but funding research into Irish emigration patterns, supporting cultural exchange programs, and providing scholarships for students studying Irish history and genealogy. The foundation had attracted attention from major museums and cultural institutions worldwide. The Metropolitan Museum of Art had requested a traveling exhibition featuring selected pieces from the collection. The National Gallery of Ireland had proposed a partnership to research and display items that had historical significance within Ireland itself. Harvard University had offered to establish a research center dedicated to studying the economic and cultural impact of Irish emigration during the early 20th century. Yet perhaps the most meaningful transformation had been in my relationship with Rose's memory itself. Through months of research and discovery, I had come to understand that her decision to live modestly while preserving extraordinary wealth had represented a form of wisdom that extended far beyond simple financial planning. Rose had understood that true security came not from displaying wealth, but from maintaining the discretion and flexibility that allowed her to respond to changing circumstances without attracting unwanted attention. She had lived through the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and economic uncertainty that had taught her the value of appearing ordinary while maintaining extraordinary resources. More importantly, she had recognized that the jewelry collection represented cultural heritage that belonged to communities rather than individuals. Her 70 years of careful stewardship had ensured that these treasures would eventually find their way to people who could appreciate their historical significance, rather than simply their monetary value. The vindication I had experienced when my family's assumptions were proven wrong had evolved into something deeper and more lasting. I had not only been right about the jewelry's potential value, but I had become the family member whose interests and expertise were most suited to managing the responsibilities that came with such extraordinary inheritance. My siblings now consulted me regularly on decisions about the foundation's activities and the collection's management. Our parents had begun sharing stories about Rose that they had never mentioned before, memories that took on new significance in light of what we had learned about her background and circumstances. Most remarkably, we had discovered letters that Rose had hidden throughout the farmhouse, messages intended for future generations that explained her decisions and provided guidance for managing the wealth she had preserved. Her final letter, found sealed behind a loose board in her bedroom closet, had brought tears to everyone's eyes when we gathered to read it together. "My dear family," the letter began in Rose's careful handwriting, "if you are reading this, then you have discovered the treasures I have kept safe for you throughout my life in America. These pieces represent more than wealth. They are the dreams and hopes of families who trusted me to preserve their heritage when they could no longer protect it themselves." She had explained her decision to live modestly, describing how the immigrant experience had taught her that security came from blending in rather than standing out. She had chosen to work as a teacher because she loved children and education, not because she needed the income, but because meaningful work provided purpose that wealth alone could never supply. I hope you will understand that I preserved these treasures not for their monetary value, but because they represent the resilience and determination of people who refused to let political upheaval destroy their family legacies, Rose had written. Use them wisely, with respect for the stories they carry and the responsibilities they represent. The letter had concluded with specific instructions for each family member, though the guidance for me had been the most detailed and personal. To Cassandra, who has always understood that the past and present are connected in ways that others overlook, I entrust the primary responsibility for ensuring that these treasures find their proper place in preserving our heritage for future generations. Reading those words had confirmed what I had begun to understand throughout the months of discovery and revelation. Rose had recognized qualities in me that even I hadn't fully appreciated, seeing potential for stewardship and historical preservation that aligned perfectly with the responsibilities her inheritance would require. The financial impact of our inheritance had been extraordinary, providing resources that allowed each family member to pursue interests and opportunities that had previously been impossible. Marcus had established a legal clinic providing pro bono services to immigrant families navigating complex estate and inheritance issues. Victoria had created a foundation supporting women entrepreneurs in Pennsylvania's rural communities. Our parents had purchased a small cottage in County Cork, fulfilling a lifelong dream of visiting Rose's birthplace and reconnecting with Irish relatives who had remained in Ireland throughout the political upheavals that had forced our branch of the family to emigrate. Yet the most meaningful changes had been personal rather than financial. The discovery of Rose's secret had brought our family closer together, while forcing each of us to reconsider assumptions about success, worth, and the ways that value could be measured and preserved. I had learned that the quiet work of preservation and documentation could have impact far beyond what was immediately visible or appreciated. My years of being overlooked by family members who focused on more obvious forms of achievement had actually prepared me perfectly for managing responsibilities that required patience, attention to detail, and respect for historical significance. The vindication I had experienced was complete, but it had evolved into something more substantial than simple family recognition. I had discovered a life's work that utilized my skills and interests, while serving purposes larger than personal satisfaction or financial gain. As I locked the vault and prepared to leave Pemberton and Associates that afternoon, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from feeling invisible and undervalued to becoming the steward of one of America's most significant cultural collections. The emerald cardigan I had worn to Rose's house that first day of sorting had become something of a uniform for Foundation events, a reminder of the person I had been when everything changed. Sometimes the most powerful transformations happen quietly, built through consistent vision and patient determination, while others focus on more obvious measures of success. Rose had understood this truth throughout her remarkable life, preserving extraordinary wealth through 70 years of careful stewardship, while appearing to be exactly what her community expected her to be. Her final gift to our family had been not just the financial resources to pursue our dreams, but the opportunity to learn that true worth often lies hidden beneath ordinary appearances, waiting for someone with the wisdom and patience to recognize its value. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.